Welcome everybody to the second session in our series on product vision design. My name is Evan Karatzas. I'm the founder and CEO of Proximity Lab. We are a UX research and product design firm, and today we'll be talking with the team from Adobe about product vision and the ways that machine intelligence is changing the nature of how products are built, conceived, and released. In interest of full disclosure, Adobe is a client of ours. We've been working with them for about 13 years as a UX research and product design partner. And we kicked off this discussion series a few months ago. The first session was an introduction to the topic. We had Keela Robinson, VP of Product Innovation at Netflix, and Alyssa Briggs, Director of Design at Autodesk, joining us, and talked about the way defining product vision, the ways various teams are approaching that work. We'll definitely continue that topic here. If you're interested in watching that, that's available. You can just stream it, proximitylab.com, and click on Insights, you'll see it there. So yeah, we continue the discussion series today. We've got a team of designers, researchers, and scientists from Adobe. The focus here is on leveraging AI and machine learning into design tools for creative pros. So we're gonna take a look at a few different approaches. You'll hear some terms around AI infused and AI first, and we'll define those. But essentially talking about the various opportunities and challenges that exist when we're dealing with AI and machine learning generally, and how those different approaches impact the product and business strategy in different ways. They're going to give us a look at some of the product experiences and features that have been released most recently. And we'll talk a little bit about what the future holds in terms of product vision that leverages machine learning in ways that transcend some of the existing conventions and frameworks of modern design tools. So kind of interesting dynamic between sort of AI infused, working within the frameworks of current tools, and AI first, where it's more of a clean sheet, and there's different sort of paradigms to consider there. So let me introduce the panel. Joining me, we've got Patrick Hebron. He's a designer, software developer, teacher, and author. He leads the machine intelligence design team within Adobe Design, focusing on the design of new interfaces and interaction mechanisms for AI and machine learning in Adobe's creative tools. He's the author of Machine Learning for Designers, published by O'Reilly Media, and as well as articles including Rethinking Design Tools in the Age of Machine Learning and a Unified Tool for the Education of Humans and Machines. Patrick, welcome. All right, and then we've also got Sarah Kong. She is the Senior Principal Scientist and Design Director of Applied Research at Adobe. She's been a driving force for transforming research technologies into high-quality product features and experiences. She's been with Adobe for 24 years. During that time, she's helped develop and apply artificial intelligence, machine learning, and advanced imaging technologies, which have been productized into products like Photoshop for iPad, Lightroom Mobile, and Adobe Sensei services. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Next, we have Nathan Carr, Senior Principal Scientist and Director of Research at Adobe. He's developed a number of new ideas that have been released in Adobe products over the past 14 years, including Photoshop, After Effects, mobile-based product experiences. In his current role, Nathan leads a team of research scientists focused on a wide range of topics, including generative adversarial networks for imaging, style transfer, capture and inverse rendering, 2D and 3D geometric modeling, and photorealistic rendering. Nathan also co-invented K-curves, the basis for the new curvature tool in Illustrator and Photoshop. Nathan, welcome.
Thank you.
And last, we've got Wilson Chan. He's the Senior Experience Researcher of Design, Research, and Strategy at Adobe. He's got over 15 years of industry experience building products for professionals and consumers. Wilson focuses on partnerships with design, engineering, and research teams at Adobe to build AI and ML-based experiences that focus on customer needs, and recently led some of the user research for the neural filters feature in Photoshop, which we'll be talking about today. Wilson, welcome. All right, so let's dive right in. Before we get into some of the machine intelligence focused work, I wanted to talk a little bit about product vision at Adobe more generally. Virtually all software companies, Adobe certainly included, they have a formal process for connecting business and product strategy and essentially moving through the various stages of development, including early concept work, and to get teams aligned around priorities of timing of features and releases. And through the work we've been doing with Adobe, we're familiar with those stages. But Sarah, I guess the first question to you, you've been at Adobe for 24 plus years now. You've been closely involved with a lot of releases, particularly around Photoshop and advanced imaging. Can you tell us a little bit about how product vision work is typically handled at Adobe, how it fits into the product development process, and who leads this vision work and who's involved? So just more generally, a little bit of background on how that work is done.
Sure. At Adobe, we use a very customer-focused, data-driven approach in defining the product vision. And so, if you have a new idea, new hypothesis, usually is vetted by customers or potential customers. And so we typically use lean development methodology. And so we use user research, and Wilson will go talk about it more later. And then we'll have the design mockups and engineering prototypes and bring them to the customers to get a validation from them for the initial concept. And then we build and iterate, basically, build, measure, learn, and in order to really validate and build out the product vision. For the existing products, like, in order to define the next version, we do what we call learning sprint, where we talk to the customers so that we validate and making sure that we are on the right track and the product vision is in the right direction. And we have very active pre-release programs, and we have ongoing relationship and engagement with the customers to get their feedback. We also send out surveys to our customers throughout the year. Survey results usually give us very valuable insight into our customers' requests and needs and pain points. Adobe founders actually believe that great ideas come from anywhere in the company. And so product teams themselves, right, from different disciplines, play a key role in defining the product vision. And also advanced technologies like, machine learning, AI models, availability of them and readiness of them for production also contribute to the product vision.
That's great, thanks. Wilson, to you, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the role that research plays in shaping product vision. Can you give us a little bit of a look into that?
Sure. I think, as Sarah mentioned, it is very customer focused and very user focused. So we are involved in many different parts of shaping the product vision. Primarily, I think we want to make sure that the solutions that we're building address user needs and actually could be a viable business. So oftentimes we conduct new exploratory research as well as leveraging existing research that we might have. Both primary research that we've conducted ourselves, as well as secondary research or syndicated research that might be done outside by other researchers to help kind of inform this vision. And what we typically do is when we have these findings, we will share these findings not only with the team, but also potentially do things like workshop where we can kind of collaboratively come out with ideas and things that we can try and experiment with. And then once we have these hypotheses, we may conduct additional research. It might be in the form of surveys, or it might be in the form of bringing in customers. So there are different forms depending on what we're trying to do. And these research that we're doing is we're trying to fill knowledge gap, as well as trying to get feedback on hypotheses. And as Sarah mentioned, that great ideas and ideas do come from different parts of the company. And one of the big thing that we find over and over again is whenever a project starts, different teams will get quickly pulled in, whether it's different disciplines or different product teams that are involved in that might have expertise in that particular area.
And you find that those other teams, whether it's engineering or product design, research, tend to influence the product vision in those early stages?
Oh, definitely. I think a lot of them, they might have already done research or they might have gone down certain paths before that it's great to be able to leverage the institutional knowledge that the company has. I mean, one of the great things with Adobe is like there's a lot of people that have been at Adobe, that have been working at Adobe for quite a long time. And so a lot of things have been tried and certain ideas might not have been the right time like 10 years ago, but it might be the right time now. So being able to leverage a lot of that existing knowledge is great.
That's great. Let's move the topic a little bit to the machine intelligence work that's been happening at Adobe. So it's certainly starting to show up in design tools for creative pros in a much more visible way. Certainly over the last few years, we've seen what started as more like prototypical experiments give way to true like in-product features powered by machine learning. The recent release of neural filters in Photoshop, I think it was just at Max this fall. There's a really highly visible example of that, and in features like subject selection and sky replacement within Photoshop. It's fair to say, I think that AI and ML is really starting to be more visible within the Adobe product suite. And Patrick, just as I know you're heading up the machine intelligence design group, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the work that group is doing, how it came to be, what its purpose and charter is. Could you maybe start there?
Yeah. So my team started, we started about 3 years ago in earnest, and prior to that, really kind of came out of a conversation between my former boss, Jamie Myrold, VP of Design, and one of Nathan's colleagues in research, John Brandt, who were sort of seeing that basically with a really transformative potential in the paradigm of AI, there were going to be lots of places in which AI infused, sort of framings of these kinds of functionalities into existing products, could follow, some of the ways that we've been thinking about product development before, but that also it was going to sort of make sense to sort of try to bring some of the design work, into sort of the early stage explorations, and try to sort of look at how design can help to sort of co-evolve the model architectures alongside of the interaction paradigms. And so that's what we were set up in our charter for. We played a role in co-initiating neural filters, so we do look to help to coordinate stuff that's happening in the flagship products. But a significant portion of our focus is also on kind of looking at what new product opportunities exist, and so we do that in really close collaboration with researchers and understanding sort of what the essence of the technologies are, and then how to think about what kinds of interaction mechanisms or abstractions on top of the sort of inputs and outputs of those models may make sense for users.
That's great. Can you tell us a little bit about the nature of some of the working relationships between designers, researchers, and others? And I know that oftentimes, that's not one role or the other. You've got individuals on your team that are researchers and designers, and contributing in a variety of ways. But can you talk a little bit about how these teams and different members kind of work together, and maybe add some color to that?
Yep. So my team is about half designers and half machine learning engineers, more or less. The reason we have that sort of within the team is so that within the stuff that we're working on, we can have sort of a really tight iterative loop in kind of testing the visual design against the algorithmic elements of the interaction mechanisms. But of course, those back into the machine learning architectures, and so what we really sort of try to do is to then have the broader collaboration be to sort of suggest what we see as kind of inroads into places where there may be opportunities, and sort of help to find use cases or just sort of framings of the technologies, and have those be evolved, of course, on the research side, and then on the product side. There's always a lot to be done in kind of trying to sort of find the fit in sort of the overall framing of the application. When it comes to the AI first stuff, which of course we'll talk a lot more over the course of this hour, about sort of how we're thinking about all of that. But there we sort of are sometimes starting with a blank slate, and so so the collaboration is it's sort of how to solve all sides of the Rubik's Cube simultaneously. How do you address existing needs as well as open new ones? How do the sort of technologies and say the constraints of the kinds of hardware that's required, to run these models, how does all of that kind of come together in the overall experience?
That's great. So Wilson, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the nature of the more machine intelligence focused work you've been involved with, and I'm really curious if there's a difference in the approach to research that you're taking. And I know a lot of the focus is user research. Is there a fundamental difference with the machine intelligence based work as opposed to other perhaps more predictable product experiences? Does that change the way that you approach research?
Sure. In some way, it's the same, and in some ways, they're different. So, for the most part, we want to make sure that our solutions address user needs. So it's important that we keep that focus. And for me, that means making sure that I connect with the other researchers on the team who have experience doing research on certain type of users or certain type of problems, to make sure that I'm leveraging the knowledge that they have. At the end of the day, I think most of the users don't necessarily care what the underlying technology is, as long as things work. But specifically to the project that I work on, a lot of them with Patrick, some of the projects are really early in development. And so not all of them come to fruition. So a lot of times I try to make sure that the findings that I get can be generalized to other projects as well. So for example, I was working on a project that ended before, after we had done a few prototype testing, and I was able to generalize that findings from that research and create design tenets and principles and leverage them on other projects. And then going back to your question is like, are there fundamental difference between kind of projects that have machine learning components in it versus not? I think there are three things that kind of, there's three things that are different that I kind of want to point out. One is that with machine learning, sometimes it's not really easy for us, even as developer of these technologies, to really understand how things work. So because of that uncertainty, it's more important for the team to think about testing early, thinking about how to build in feedback loop and data collection, and doing it in a way that respect user privacy and doing it in a way that's legally compliant, and then thinking about how to help users recover from mistakes. The other challenge is that sometimes a machine learning model worked well in one context, but doesn't work well in another context. So from a design perspective, how do you communicate that to the user? And then the last one, obviously, is that with ML models work by kind of giving you statistically likely results. So what happens if you try to do something intentionally out of the box, like many of our creative users would try to do? And then also, how do you make sure you're mitigating any bias that might be coming from the machine learning models? So those are new things that we as a company need to kind of think about and tackle as we tackle more kind of machine learning projects.
That's great. Yeah, and we'll dig into some of that, I think, when we get to demoing some of the work. But yeah, it's fascinating. It seems like the sort of intersections between research, technology, design, product, the sort of business, there does seem to be a different way of working and a different opportunity. There's something really special that I think that's coming out of the work that your teams are doing. And I kind of see it a little bit in contrast to, oftentimes in big enterprise companies, you get into these very siloed situations where engineering's over here, design is over here, product is over here, the business is more or less connected. There's this sort of territorial mindset that can sometimes get in the way of like innovation and collaboration. And it feels like the need for this high level of collaboration between technologists and researchers and designers, that it just seems like it's creating like a more connected relationship between these different disciplines. And so Sarah, I guess the next question to you, is this sort of a new dynamic that's being driven by some of these technologies? Do you see it in that way, or is this really a natural evolution of the way that Adobe's been developing, products and thinking about the vision all along? Is this fundamentally something new, or is it more, of an evolution?
I think it's an evolution because we at Adobe, we collaborate really well across functional teams. Because we use lean methodology, we have to naturally come together to prove out ideas and hypotheses. And so, the initial ideas might be born in different organization or in different discipline, but they eventually come together and they merge, right? And we have to join forces to prove out the viability of the idea and the technology itself, right? So we have to iterate the technology, we have to iterate the design, and we do work together to really realize those vision. So yeah, I mean, Adobe is very collaborative, and so then I think you might feel like, okay, it's a competition because you might not be aware. I mean, it like many teams are very innovative, right? And they come up with new ideas, and then they will try to experiment and incubate ideas and try to do some exploration around a similar idea. But once we find out that they're all similar ideas, we try to align and work together.
That's great. Yeah, Nathan, just to kind of picking up on that, maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the projects that your team has been working on, maybe some of the origins of some of those ideas and how they found their way into some of the flagship products.
Sure, absolutely. I apologize, I dropped. I literally lost power at my place a moment ago, but this is working remotely. So I'm glad to be back. And so yeah, sure. I mean, at least let me briefly mention sort of like the division of Adobe I'm from. I mean, it's called Adobe Research, but like Sarah said, research happens actually across the company and comes from anywhere. People have lots of ideas. One of the interesting things about our division is we tend to sort of track the bleeding edge of technology. So we publish kind of at the cutting edge of what's happening in academia and what's sort of technically possible. And the interesting bit is that we're a little bit dissected from customers. Like we do go and work with Sarah's team and Patrick and Wilson to try to validate some of the things that we come up with. But there's like a part of us that's just kind of trying things that are like just out there, and we're not sure whether they're ready or what they're good for, and just out of intuition. And so I think that it's a nice way to have like different parts of the company sort of focusing on different aspects. Because one thing we found over time is sometimes customers don't exactly know what to ask for or what's even possible. And so and sometimes we come up with something we don't know in research what it is good for. And so that's why we go over to Sarah and say, hey, we can do this. Is it useful, right? And then Sarah, can go and work with customers, or Wilson can run these studies and find out, is this something that is that customers would actually want? And so we have like a mix of things going on. So I'll mention specifically with AI, we track a lot of the state-of-the-art stuff, and I'll show you some of the neural filters. Hopefully we'll have time to show some of the neural filter stuff later. Some of those original concepts actually started back maybe 4 or 5 years ago in research. We had like early prototypes, and you would sketch on an image and it would like generate pixels using AI algorithms, and it would be only like very low resolution, something totally not usable, right? And you would look at it and be like, what is this good for? Is it even practical today? And those types of innovations sort of laid the seed for things that sort of went out in neural filters last fall. And it took literally 5 years to go from something that was kind of just a tech demo or a promise or a glimpse of what the future could be, and very, very early vision. And so this is a lot of what we do, is we have things that are targeted near term, but also a lot of things that are kind of out there and they're just not ready yet. And but that's part of the exploration.
That's great. Yeah, and Patrick, back to you. Just given the sort of experimental nature of some of the work that Nathan's describing and the work that I know your team is doing, does that present any challenges in terms of getting teams aligned? Like, does this more experimental nature of the work pose challenges, like particularly around like intersections between the business and product and some of the other teams? Does that make that more challenging or not?
And I think it's always easier to get consensus about something when people can visualize or sort of be on the same page about what you're talking about. That's not always easy with a really far-reaching technology. The sort of development of the algorithm plays a big part of that. Training on a particular content area, being able to develop the data set to do that in the first place. All of this, sort of creates some barrier to entry in terms of sort of even being able to present the materials that will put us on the same page. And so, so obviously that's something we just have to account for, in the process. In terms of sort of, design work, we of course, have to really kind of move outside of static mockups in this kind of context. I mean, as a general prototyping principle, again, I think it's important to show the thing that people will sort of least be able to picture the same as you're picturing it. And so if you say kind of like, hey, imagine this, but imagine it at twice the resolution, like everyone's going to more or less imagine the same thing, right? But if you say something, like, okay, imagine that we can, kind of change the face in this kind of complicated way that you've never seen in a product before. This is not something where people are all going to have in mind exactly what you have in mind, right? And so, so again, I think sort of speaking through prototypes and speaking through sort of a live enablement of it is really, really significant. And then I think the other thing, sort of tying back to, to part of what Nathan's talking about, there's of course, fitting existing needs, but also there's many places where users sort of wouldn't yet know to ask for something that relates to an emergent capability, right? And in some ways, like, I don't know, nobody needed a cell phone 50 years ago. Now everyone needs a cell phone, right? And so, so in some respects, the capability creates the need, but of course that's not just universally true. So you have to sort of figure out ways of extrapolating how those two things are going to come together, and of course how to do that across, people who are really operating in related but also different languages. I think one of the really nice things that makes this a bit easier at Adobe is that that really everyone has some shared vocabulary. The people who are sort of most deeply steeped in the technical research are also have always been in their careers thinking about this in the context of design problems. So this makes this much more relatable for designers. So I think that in some respects, we actually kind of have that easy because all of us are thinking about things that, the tools we make are also in a lot of ways the kinds of tools that we would use ourselves.
That's fascinating. Yeah, if we maybe move into some concrete examples, I'd love to talk a little bit about, Sarah, you used this term AI infused. It's the first time I had heard it when we were talking, as a way of differentiating between, AI capabilities that are incorporated into existing products, as opposed to more blue sky paradigm shifting, the quote unquote AI first approach. Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the considerations with AI infused work and maybe share a couple of examples.
Yeah, sure. AI, specifically the deep learning innovations, are driving exciting breakthroughs in the field of computer vision, and so we are able to produce better results more automatically with AI algorithms than using the traditional computer vision algorithms. So I'm going to share a few examples. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen? Okay. So let me. Well, I'm going to walk through a few examples where we are leveraging AI algorithms in our software. And so first, I'm going to walk through a very typical Photoshop workflow where I'm trying to segment the foreground and composite it against this new background, let's say, right? And so I'll start out with using the traditional quick select tool and try to select the foreground. And as you can see, I have to, scribble multiple times, and then the tool kind of struggle with the stripes on the shirt, and then it makes mistakes, then I have to delete it. So let me, in the interest of time, I'm going to just delete this. And then I'm going to use the AI-based select subject feature to select the foreground. And just one click, you get the selection. This is a selection you get. And I'm going to create a mask to see the composite. So with a couple of clicks with the AI algorithm, you can get this kind of result very, very quickly. And this is the type of mask that is generated by the AI algorithm. So I'll show you another example. So here's a lot of hair, and hair selection is one of the biggest challenges of masking. And so again, I'm going to run the AI based select subject again, and to show you the type of results you can get with this. Sorry. So this is a mask that you can get with the AI algorithm. And so this type of mask, it's really hard to get this with a traditional tool, right? And it would take 30 minutes to even longer. Now with one click, you can get really detailed selection of the hair. Let me jump into the new feature, selecting the sky and replacing the sky. So let's say in this image, I want to change the brightness of the sky. And again, I'm going to use a traditional tool to select the sky, quickly create this brightness and contrast adjustments. And as you can see, the old tool is not capturing the sky in between the cables of the bridge. And so let me disable that, and I'm going to use the new select sky tool, which we shipped at Max last year. So now you get the new sky, and I'm going to use the same brightness and contrast. And now you see that, we capture all the sky. And this is the mask that you get, right? So you can see that, even through the cable, we are capturing all the sky. So now let's say you want to, change the sky altogether to make it more, to give it a more dynamic look. And so we have this sky replace feature where the AI algorithm will segment the sky automatically, and then create the realistic compositing with one click. And you can, change to different sky very quickly. And machine learning models do the heavy lifting of, compositing segmentation. I'll show you one last example. So again, this image has not very interesting sky, and so I'm going to use sky replace. And this is the type of composite you can get, and this is before, and this is after. Let's say I want the other sky because I want to show something. So when I move the sky to the bluer part of the area, and you see the foreground, the lighting and the color changes to reflect the new blue tone of the sky. And if you move it to the warmer sunset area, you see the foreground reflected as well. And so this is a very good example of AI infused feature, right? So we are using AI to do the segmentation, reduce a lot of manual drudgery and manual work to get the sky selected. But then you also have all those controls, so you can even make the sky warmer. I'm not sure whether you've seen the changes, right? And so basically you have all the powerful controls to edit the image to your heart content. And when you hit OK, we are also preserving all the layers. So non-destructive editing, and this is the sky mask, right? You can see all the detail through the fence as well, right? And so this kind of composite also usually take, 10 minutes or longer. Some people say, an hour or longer to create a real, realistic composite. But now you can get the result in seconds with the help of AI.
That's great. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about I'm thinking about the subject selection that you demoed, and what kind of training needs to be done to help the audience understand like how you are able to tune this to the point where it's going to work in the most possible situations, knowing that, you know, there's different quality of imagery, the sort of distinction between what's in the foreground and what's in the background can be very variable. So can you give us an understanding of like what it took to get to the sort of shippable version of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have to use hundreds and thousands of images to train the machine learning model. So we will input, you know, the original image and without the mask, and then with the original image, and then corresponding mask. And so, you know, we train the machine learning model to actually start understanding the pattern, right? And so, yeah, I mean, you know, lots of data required, and the challenge is the high quality data. So in order to create that very, very detailed fine mask, it takes a lot of manual work. So that's where the challenge is, and you know, we had to create thousands of those to train the model.
That's great. Yeah, Nathan, I wonder if maybe you could share a little bit of your perspective on AI infused. And I know I would love to see the neural filters demo if you're able to share that.
Sure, I'd be happy to share that. You know, one thing I wanted to mention about Cheryl's demo, which is sort of an exciting glimpse of the future, you'll notice that it's about select sky. And so that's a semantic kind of meaningful thing to users. And I think it's really exciting to see more features go in that are more of talking at a semantic level about how we operate with images and photographs, as opposed to select pixel or select layer, right? And so I think it's exciting, and maybe a glimpse of what could be possible once AI machine learning progresses and gets better over time. So let me share my screen. So this is kind of a hot off the press. Can you see my screen? Thumbs up?
Yeah, you look good.
Yeah, so this is sort of a hot off the press feature. It was shipped last fall. It's still in beta. And, and I want to mention that because, in part, the reason why it's in beta is when you ship AI features, there's a lot of unpredictability when you train an AI algorithm. A lot of times you've trained it on a lot of examples. And when you do an operation, you're not always quite certain what result you'll get back. And so it takes a lot of iteration. It takes a lot of iteration with users. It takes a lot of feedback. It used to be in the old days in research and also even shipping product, we'd write an algorithm and we'd know how to test it against all possible inputs and outputs, or have a way to validate its quality and know how to predict what that algorithm might produce. In some sense, once we've moved into this land of machine learning, we can't always predict what's going to happen. And so as I start showing you this feature, maybe in your brain, predict and think about what the answer might be, and you'll quickly realize that there's like an infinite number of possibilities when I start manipulating this tool. So I'm going to go into the neural filters. So this is a new neural filter gallery. So these are all AI-infused filters. I'm not going to demo them all. I'm actually going to go right to the feature that's kind of like at the bleeding edge, something that's kind of work in progress and very exciting to show what's possible. So I'm going to click and turn this on. And you'll see here I have all of these semantic attributes now that I can start manipulating. So suppose I want to change the gaze of this person, this portrait, and I just change it over here. You're going to notice there's a lot of processing happening in the background. And this is one of the challenges that we're still facing with AI algorithms, is they're fairly compute intensive. And so it takes a lot of work and research sometimes to even get an algorithm so that it's fast enough actually to deploy. So even if it works, making it quick enough is a challenge. So here's, I can now adjust this gaze slider. And let's see, do you see how the eyes move? I'll do it again, and I can go left and right. If you had to do this manually inside of Photoshop, this would take a long time. But here I can just rapidly explore the space. Suppose I want to change sort of the light direction. So just relight. Maybe I want it to be relit from the other side of the face. So I can quickly, rapidly change the lighting in this photograph. And these are like massive pixel adjustments that are happening. I mean, these are large jumps just by changing a single slider. And there isn't necessarily any right answer to this. I mean, I think we as humans have a good intuition of what the right answer might be. but we don't always know, what's perfect and what's good. So for us to get this feature out, and I think Wilson can talk about this more later, there was a lot of iteration where we had to get this feature in front of users. Like humans were needed to test this, to say, is it good? And it still could be better. I mean, there's a lot more to do here. So let me push on some of the more exciting types of features that come with this. So suppose I want to age this person and imagine what they would look like when they're older. So here I've cranked up the slider, and it's imagined progressing this person in age. And this might, fit better my design and what I want to achieve. The cool bit here is AI has allowed me to explore this space much faster than if I had to do all of this edit work manually, or if I had to go cast another model or go out and get another photo shoot or find another stock photo or image that I like. It allows you to explore much quicker the space and sort of discover different designs. I'll play with just a few more. So we can maybe make this person look angry. All right, this person's angry. Add some surprise. Anger and surprise, you can mix things. Maybe we do happiness. And what's really cool about here is you'll notice teeth are starting to show. And we didn't see the teeth before. And so all of the teeth generation is coming from this artificial intelligence algorithm. And, are they good teeth, bad teeth? I don't know. I'll let you decide. You're the, I guess this is the, the user and part of playing with this system. And that's what also comes with, I think, AI is this delight and serendipity, right? You don't exactly, you're not precisely controlling everything. That's almost, in some ways imperfect, but it's also perfect at the same time. I mean, it's fun. I mean, and it's a different way to interact with software that we really have not experienced before, I think.
It's really interesting. Yeah, and we talked a little bit, and maybe Wilson, you can share some of the research that went into getting to this beta version. And I know there's some stories around unintended consequences, and love to hear some of the things that your team sort of discovered along the way that had to be adjusted, before this reached the public. Could you share a little bit of that?
Sure, and I would say that this is definitely a effort that is very, very cross-discipline. We have Patrick's team that's coming up with the design, as well as our content strategist who's coming up with the UI copy, as well as the entire team, both from the research side as well as from the engineering side. I think there's definitely the normal challenge of making sure that the feature is usable and fit the user workflow while taking into consideration of schedule and technical constraints. I think the more unique challenge for this project is the fact that we're dealing with faces, and that ML results aren't always predictable, like Nathan was talking about. When we're dealing with faces, we definitely wanted to minimize the harm from potential AI bias. And that meant things like figuring out if one of the control that we're providing may contribute to reinforcing particular stereotypes, and making sure that our ML models can actually preserve details that might be of personal or cultural significance. So in some cases, like when we have the skin smoothing filter, is it taking away details of the face, like freckles or a particular scar that might be meaningful to an individual, and making sure that there's control to allow for that preservation of details. And so for the user research, we definitely worked with users across several countries, and we tried to have participants use as much of their own photos because we wanted to see how the algorithm will work. And the team also built their own diverse set of images for testing, like Sarah has said. And then, and as Sarah mentioned before, the Photoshop team luckily have a wide pre-release team that have users from across the world that were able to kind of test this with their images. And then, as Nathan mentioned, this feature is still in beta, partly because we want to make sure that we want to collect enough images. And so in neural filter, you'll notice that at the bottom of each of the filters, there's feedback mechanisms, so users can opt in to provide images to help us to continue to improve the model, because we definitely want to make sure that we collect as much training example as possible.
I appreciate you guys showing us that some of that work and peeling that back in terms of some of the challenges and opportunities. That's fantastic. With the time we have left, I'd love to shift the topic a little bit to AI first. And so now we're moving from, incorporating machine intelligence and learning into existing experiences and, the more constraint-based approach to bigger opportunities, frankly, right? So I'm wondering, Patrick, if, could you talk a little bit about sort of what AI first means and how it differs from the more sort of constraint-based work that we've been talking about. So maybe you can share some of your thinking there.
Sure. I mean, defining it is, of course, something that we spend a fair amount of time doing. But I think, roughly speaking, the way that we mean AI first is to say, an experience that kind of starts from this set of technologies, from the capabilities of AI, and sort of, treats those as the new premises from which we may draw some of the same conclusions we drew before, or perhaps other conclusions, right? So a tool fundamentally predicated on the capabilities of AI, as opposed to AI integrated into a venue where some of those premises were established sort of, prior to the existence of these technologies. And so, the opportunities are in some cases going to be different. At the same time, we have to look for familiarity. So, I think one thing that's very significant on the AI infused side is there are places where there can still be gaps in the technology. If you notice, sort of on kind of the crown of the head, in the example Nathan was showing, there was a little bit of an artifact with some of the hair, right? So this is something that we can look to Photoshop and all of its existing powers to sort of try to touch these things up. There's also a familiarity about how to interact with these kinds of things. On the flip side, in an AI first setting, there are places where perhaps sort of divorcing ourselves of some of the existing premises may create sort of liberties to interact with things in new ways that might be really useful. And at the same time, we need to really ground these, in things that are familiar, and we have to look to sort of fill the same gaps, in places where the technology still has some constraints. And I think the biggest, transformative thing for AI infused as well as AI first relates to what Nathan mentioned a moment ago, which is I think it transforms the manner of communication of your ideas to the tool. Rather than operating in the language of the tool, we can begin to operate more in the language of the content. This is really, really a very transformative thing because, and I think it relates to everyone really. It allows, professionals to sort of scaffold more complex ideas, build, more sophisticated meanings, and it also enables beginners to, to be able to articulate things that previously only professionals can do. So this is going to have a really transformative effect on the visual culture, and so I think that's some of the promise we see in it, and I think exploration is a big part of that. Being able to sort of get to something that that might have otherwise taken so many steps that you can't even really kind of conceive of actually doing it. Is now something that we sort of have random access into. And so we can try lots of different ideas. And this is, of course, very important for design work to be able to explore at a low cost.
Interesting. Could you maybe share a couple of examples or, describe, I know you might have some studies that you're able to share on screen as well, but maybe to give give the audience an idea of the kinds of things that might be possible.
Sure, yeah. So, naturally, would love nothing more than to show some of what we're building, but we are limited in some respects on that. But sort of looking at this a little bit here, and I think in a lot of ways this reiterates what we were looking at a moment ago. But on the left we have the way that you might approach this from sort of a conventional point of view of a tool sequence, right? So if your kind of design intent is to turn a chair into a bar stool, then you really have to translate that idea into a sequence of steps. And that sequence is certainly not arbitrary, but at the same time, it's looking at things from the point of view of the data representation of pixels and then sort of a set of image adjustment operations that we've laid out in our tools. It's more arduous, but it's also a translation. Whereas on the right, you know, when we start to have the machine kind of coming into contact with, what happened to my animation? Sorry, guys. When we start to, you know, have the machine kind of operating into the semantic domain, kind of understanding, say, the morphologies of these different shapes and what they represent, right? Then we can start to communicate that in terms of, you know, wanting to just, you know, raise the back or, you know, elevate the legs or something like that in the chair. And, you know, similarly in other content areas too. And so, you know, I think when people look at this, sometimes the takeaway is to say, oh, this makes things quicker, easier. And, you know, that's not untrue, and it's also not besides the point. But I think sort of the bigger thing than that is kind of, well, what's enabled by kind of, you know, the removing that unnecessary translation. And I think that, you know, basically sort of what's going to happen is that people are going to be able to sort of walk new paths much more easily in design. And so it will create sort of a more diverse visual culture and one in which people can sort of, you know, dream ever bigger.
That's really interesting. Yeah, and Sarah, to you, do you see the possibility of like new business segments, new opportunities for Adobe and any company really, you know, operating in this space? Does this create new market opportunities? Like one example that comes to mind is just the ability to generate new faces, right? To use ML and sort of composite, that has an implication on sort of stock photo markets, right? That you can now generate images that are not of any one person, but are a composite. So like, and I think some of the things that Patrick's talking about also on the more creative tooling space, where we may you may move away from things like layers and pixels and more of a semantic shift. Do you see opportunities for like new business models and sort of expanding beyond what, you know, what we've seen in the past?
Absolutely. I think you have answered part of the question yourself, Evan. Great insight. So AI is really good at automation, right? You know, multi-steps become one step. You know, I see a huge opportunity in especially the enterprise segment, where you can automate repetitive tasks. I think, you know, you can train an AI model to do a single task really well, right? So segmenting the foreground, segmenting the sky, or, you know, aging a person, you know. And so I can see that it's already happening, right? Many companies will offer microservices that are powered by, you know, AI algorithms. And another thing that I want to point out is that AI first will enable creativity for all, right? Because now it's more accessible to everyone. You know, anyone can be a creator because the learning curve is, you know, a lot lower, right? And so that will open up many doors for new business opportunities as well. AI also will be able to help even professionals to do to transcend their creative capability, right? And so, yeah, I totally believe that there will be more customer segments, new products and services. And like you mentioned, you know, yeah, we can automate some edits to the stock photos. And we can generate, you know, images, right, with using GANs. And so, yeah, a lot of possibilities.
I wanted to jump in here really quick, Evan, just to mention, you know, one thing I think AI doesn't do is it doesn't automate creativity. And I want to be clear about that. And the reason why is like AI and all these algorithms that we've trained are trained on sort of the images and content out there in the world. And so it just replicates existing patterns. It doesn't come up with new stuff. We need people to come up with new stuff and people to come up and put creativity into their designs. And so this isn't, you know, it's not a creativity automation tool. It's a, you know, acceleration of, you know, creative explorations, I think is a better way to think about where AI is headed.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, and we're almost out of time, but, you know, Nathan, on the sort of topic we were just on, could you maybe share your thoughts on like the disruptive potential for AI first, and a little bit of a lens towards the what's possible in the future? Where do you see things heading? What's your perspective on that?
Well, I mean, I think as Sarah highlighted, a lot of redundant tasks are going to, a lot of redundant tasks are going to, become a lot easier. And so people are going to be able to create a lot more content. I think the entry bar to like get going and get started in this space is going to be lowered. And so more people are going to be able to participate in creative designs and get into the space. I also like to think of, if you think about sort of the sky feature that Sarah showed, you could always drill down to a lower level and directly edit and manipulate and correct stuff if you wanted to. And I think tools will always have that in the future, that it won't, because the AI won't always do exactly what you want. It's never going to get you there all the way. And so there will be needs for professionals and experts to come in. But I think there is this hope of democratization, like of being able for more people to come in and create and explore in this new generation of creatives. That I think will be empowered, and with that opens up new markets, new opportunities, and new spaces.
Great. Yeah, Patrick, maybe giving you the sort of final word on what your view of the future is around some of these technologies and the possibilities. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I want to, echo what my colleagues have said here. I think, this is really a real transformative opportunity for users. And I think it also, sort of represents a new way of thinking about software development as well. The ways in which, we can sort of have the tool sort of be refined, personalized through its use, means that I think we can address creativity for all, as Sarah mentioned, in really new ways. At the same time, that is not magic either. This is something that we really have to design for. We have to sort of design kind of the principles and the mechanisms that are going to enable a tool to operate in that way. Keeping the focus on the user's own ability to make something new is really of the essence, right? And so that is, and Nathan touched on this before. In some ways, not antithetical necessarily to the nature of the technology, but sort of its desire to operate in sort of the realm of interpolation between what it's learned from is something that we have to kind of think about, from a design perspective, a user research perspective, how to embed that in how users are creating something new with that, right? And so so that's sort of at kind of an operational level. But again, sort of, the meaning of things is created by the users. So, been really fortunate to work so closely with all of these people, and Wilson has really been, a guiding light for my team, in looking at this from the perspective of how this relates to sort of the kinds of things that people want to do now, but also, how that's going to evolve over time.
That's such a great way to end the conversation on sort of the sort of interplay between the teams and how it's the kind of supportive relationship that exists there. That's great. Well, we're out of time. I want to thank this panel, Patrick, Sarah, Nathan, Wilson, so much for taking the time to share your thinking and to show some of this work. We're really grateful for your perspectives. I just want to also thank the audience, everybody, for joining, and we will be doing another session a few months out, so just stay tuned for that. And yeah, we'll look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks again for your time.
All right.
Thanks for having us, Evan.
Yeah, thank you, Evan.
Thank you.